In 1951, Henrietta Lacks, a poor African-American tobacco farmer and mother of 5, died of a particularly aggressive cervical cancer. Before her death, a small sample of her cells were taken from her without her knowledge or consent. And unlike every other previous sample of human cells, these did not die. These cells continued to grow and multiply, and still do so today. These cells possessed a unique and unprecedented ability. They could survive and reproduce indefinitely in a lab. They were immortal. These were the HeLa cells. The HeLa cells became the first immortalized human cell line. They were a colossal scientific breakthrough, successfully cultured and mass-produced. They have helped both save and create millions of lives ever since, becoming vital to almost every major medical development of the last century. This is the story of a forgotten woman whose body changed the world. Part 1. The Woman and Her Suffering. Henrietta Lacks was born on August 1, 1920, in Clover, Virginia. Family members recall her as a matriarch, a loving, nurturing, caring person, and a community activist. She and her husband later moved from the tobacco farm where they grew up to Turner Station in Maryland. This was a time of migration, as many African Americans moved their families, seeking better opportunities, often for work in steel mills. In 1951, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. At that time, she had limited options for care because she was a person of color. She sought treatment at Johns Hopkins Hospital, which was one of the only places near her that treated black patients. This was the era of segregation, and the hospitals utilized the quote-unquote colored wards. In treating her tumor, the practice involved sewing radium to her cervix, essentially burning her from the inside out. Her son, Lawrence Lacks, the firstborn, remembers she had a lot of pain and would often be crying in the bedroom. He was the one who had to take care of her, helping her sleep and helping her get food. He describes suffering on both ends, for Henrietta going through the radium treatment and for the family who could only sometimes see her through the hospital window. The surprising tenacity of her cancer cells, which would later become so important to medical research, ultimately took her life. Henrietta Lacks passed away on October 4, 1951, at Johns Hopkins Hospital, at the age of 31. Her daughter, Deborah Lacks, was only 2 years old. Part 2. The Birth of HeLa. Without telling her, before treating her tumor, her doctor cut a small piece of her tumor and sent it down the hall. It went to George Guy, the head of tissue culture research at Hopkins. Dr. Guy had been trying to grow human cells outside the body for decades, but it had never worked. For reasons that remain a mystery, Henrietta's cells never died. They started doubling their numbers every 24 hours. They quickly took over the lab, and George Guy realized he had the first immortal human cell line. On the very same day that Henrietta Lacks passed away, October 4, 1951, Dr. George Guy held a press conference on the steps of Johns Hopkins Hospital to announce that he had the human cell line, HeLa. He never acknowledged that the HeLa cells came from Henrietta Lacks. This refusal to acknowledge her identity is viewed by the family as significant and disrespectful. In response to colleagues worldwide asking for the cells, George Guy sent them to anyone who wanted to use them for research, and they spread around the world very fast. The cells were named HeLa for Henrietta Lacks. However, researchers often use pseudonyms for her, and the world recognized her as Helen Lane or Henry Lawson. They refused to say her name. It was believed researchers worried if people knew the cell came from a black woman, they would be reluctant to get the polio vaccine and other essential things. Part 3. Scientific Revolution and Global Impact. HeLa cells became one of the most important things that happened to medicine. They were mass-produced and shipped to labs across the globe, becoming vital to almost every major medical development of the last century. The HeLa cell gave doctors and scientists a way to test for vaccines. Her cells were used to help create the polio vaccine, as well as the HPV vaccinations and the COVID-19 vaccinations. They were also essential in the development of chemotherapy drugs, such as vincristine and tamoxifen. The uses for the cells were vast. They were used to help develop in vitro fertilization. Her cells were the first ever cloned, and her genes were some of the first ever mapped. To observe what happens to human cells in zero gravity, her cells even went up in the first space missions. Basically, almost all of the vaccines we take today can be traced back to research with her cells. There isn't a person out there who hasn't benefited from research on her cells. Even recently, with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the HeLa cells were at the forefront of the early research which helped to shape our understanding of the virus. Family members express pride that she's not only helping a specific group of people, but she's helping everybody worldwide. She's saving lives. She's giving life. Part 4. Ethical Conflict and Legacy. While her cells created a multi-million-dollar industry and revolutionized medicine, Henrietta Lacks was buried in an unmarked grave, and her family remained in poverty. For over 20 years, the family did not know that her cells were being used in research. The family initially learned about the cells quite by accident. Henrietta's daughter-in-law, Babette Lacks, was at a dinner party when someone recognized the last name and revealed that the cells were being used at Hopkins. The narrative of her story follows author Rebecca Skloot's decade-long quest to uncover Henrietta's identity, working closely with her daughter, Deborah Lacks. Deborah Lacks, who was just 2 when her mother died, experienced intense mixed emotions. While she gained peace realizing the incredible things her mother did for science, there was also deep anger that everyone had benefited except her family. Millions of dollars had been made off the HeLa cell, yet the family was still struggling with basic health care. This story is a profound examination of the intersection of race, class, medical ethics, and scientific progress. People have often dehumanized her, focusing only on the advancements and the money made from the HeLa cell, and not talking about the woman that the cells came from. The story reveals the lasting damage of medical exploitation. Today, the Lacks family is working to take back and control the narrative of her legacy. They collaborated with the NIH and formed the HeLa Genome Committee. This committee, which includes Lacks family members and NIH scientists, reviews applications for anyone who wants to do research with Henrietta's genome. This unprecedented collaboration means that the family now has a seat at the table. Instead of being the last to know, they would be the first to know. The family members state that they are now her voices, demanding a spot in history. For Henrietta Lacks, who unknowingly provided life to millions, she is finally taking her place in history where she belongs.